When people think about the invention of money, they usually imagine ancient markets filled with traders, merchants exchanging goods, and clever systems designed to make trade easier. We are taught that money emerged naturally from barter, that people grew tired of trading goats for grain and needed a neutral medium of exchange. But history tells a very different story. Money did not begin in markets. It did not begin with traders. It began with war. More specifically, money was invented to pay soldiers. Long before coins jingled in merchant pouches, long before marketplaces hummed with commerce, early human societies operated on trust, obligation, and debt. Farmers shared harvests, craftsmen exchanged labor, and communities survived through relationships rather than transactions. If you needed grain, you didn't hand over silver, you owed a favor. Debt was social, not financial. In fact, historians and anthropologists have found almost no evidence of large-scale barter economies operating before money. Instead, what they found were systems of credit, obligation, and mutual dependence. Then something changed. Small communities turned into states, and states needed armies. As early kingdoms began expanding their territory, defending borders, and enforcing authority, they faced a new problem. How do you maintain a standing army? Soldiers were no longer seasonal fighters defending their homes. They were professionals, men who left their farms, their families, and their villages to fight for rulers they might never meet. These soldiers could not survive on social debt or promises of future favors. They needed food, equipment, and shelter immediately. And more importantly, they needed a reason to keep fighting. That is where money enters the story. Early states realized that controlling violence required controlling payment. You could not rely on goodwill to keep an army loyal. You needed something standardized, portable, and universally accepted. So rulers began minting coins, not for trade but for payroll. Coins were stamped with symbols of authority, gods, kings, or empires. They weren't just pieces of metal, they were declarations of power. This coin has value because the state says it does. The genius of the system wasn't just paying soldiers, it was what came next. Once soldiers were paid in state-issued money, they spent it. They bought food from farmers, tools from craftsmen, clothes from villagers. But here's the catch. Those farmers and craftsmen had no reason to accept the coins at first. Metal discs meant nothing to them. So the state made a simple rule. Taxes must be paid in this money. Suddenly, everyone needed the coins. Not because they trusted them, but because they feared the consequences of not having them. This was the true innovation. Money was not forced into society by convenience. It was enforced by taxation. By demanding taxes in the same currency used to pay soldiers, states created artificial demand. People didn't use money because it was efficient. They used it because survival depended on it. If you wanted to avoid punishment, imprisonment, or violence, you had to acquire the state's money. And the only way to get it was to sell your labor, goods, or services to those who already had it, usually soldiers or officials. This cycle transformed entire economies. Markets did not create money. Money created markets. Once everyone needed coins to pay taxes, markets naturally emerged around them. Trade expanded, prices formed, and value became quantified. But at the core of it all was state power. Money was not neutral. It was a tool, designed to move resources toward the state and sustain its military strength. We can see this pattern repeated across civilizations. In ancient Mesopotamia, temples and palaces recorded debts thousands of years before coins existed. But when armies grew larger and more permanent, rulers began standardizing units of payment. In Lydia, often credited with inventing the first coins, those coins were primarily used to pay mercenary soldiers. In ancient Greece, city-states minted silver coins not for traders, but to fund wars. Athens' famous silver drachma spread across the Mediterranean, not because merchants loved it, but because Athenian soldiers spent it everywhere they marched. The Roman Empire perfected this system. Rome's economy revolved around its legions. Soldiers were paid in denarii, and taxes were collected in the same currency. Wherever Roman armies went, Roman money followed. Roads, markets, and cities formed around military logistics. When Rome expanded, its money expanded. When Rome struggled to pay its soldiers, the empire weakened. Coin debasement, mixing silver with cheaper metals, was not a financial mistake. It was a desperate attempt to keep armies paid when resources ran thin. And when soldiers stopped trusting the money, Rome fell. This relationship between money and military power never disappeared. It only evolved. During medieval times, kings minted coins primarily to fund wars. During colonial expansion, empires imposed taxes on colonized populations payable only in imperial currency. This forced local economies to abandon traditional systems and integrate into imperial markets. In British colonies, people who had lived self-sufficient lives suddenly needed British money to pay taxes. To get it, they had to work on plantations, mines, or colonial projects. Money became a weapon, silent, efficient, and devastating. Even modern money follows the same logic. Paper money did not replace coins because people wanted lighter wallets. It emerged because wars became more expensive. Governments needed faster ways to fund massive armies. Gold was too slow, too limited. So states issued paper backed not by metal, but by authority. And once again, taxes enforced its value. You accept paper money today not because it has intrinsic worth, but because the government demands it for taxes and debts. This is the part most people never think about. Money's value does not come from trust alone. It comes from obligation. You must pay taxes. You must settle debts. You must comply. And to do so, you must use the state's money. That is why money works, even when it's just paper or numbers on a screen. It is backed by the power of law, enforcement, and ultimately violence. This doesn't mean money is evil. It means money is political. Every time a state prints currency, sets tax policy, or funds military operations, it is repeating the same ancient formula. Pay the army. Tax the people. Maintain control. Understanding this changes how we see the modern world. When governments run deficits, they are not running out of money the way households do. They are managing obligations, especially military, security, and state functions. When inflation rises, it is often tied to the cost of maintaining power. When currencies collapse, it is usually because the state behind them can no longer enforce trust or taxation effectively. Money is not just an economic tool. It is a social contract enforced by authority. And once you see that, you realize something unsettling. Trade is not the foundation of money. Power is. Markets flourish where armies have already marched. Commerce follows stability, and stability is enforced. From ancient battlefields to modern global finance, money has always moved in the shadow of soldiers. So the next time someone tells you money exists because humans wanted easier trade, remember this. Before money, people traded just fine. What they couldn't do was maintain empires. Money wasn't invented to help merchants. It was invented to pay soldiers and make sure everyone else fell in line.